Hey guys, welcome to US History 1301. This is my introductory video. You do not have to write any of this down or memorize it. This is just my introduction and my explanation of why I'm here and why you're here. Some of you may know who Frank Abagnale is. If you've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, that's who Leonardo DiCaprio is playing, the most successful con artist in US history. One thing that they did not show in the movie, the real Frank Abagnale, at one point, he forged a degree from Columbia University, sociology degree, and then he went and taught at BYU for a semester. Abagnale had never been to college himself, and he managed to impersonate a college professor for an entire semester. When asked after he was caught, how did you manage to trick everyone into thinking you were a college instructor, especially the students? He said, it was very easy. I just stayed one day ahead of them in the textbook. Just so you know, I'm not some weirdo that has decided to fake being a history instructor. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. First and most importantly, I have a cat named Elizabeth Catty, C-A-T-Y. She is named after Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Stanton is the founder of the women's rights movement in U.S. history. She's the one that will call for the Seneca Falls Convention, and she will start the women's suffrage movement, calling for women's right to vote. Besides Catty, I also have a dog named Teddy Bear. Teddy Bear is named after Theodore Roosevelt. The teddy bear used to be called Teddy's Bear because of a great story about Teddy Roosevelt not shooting a bear. They made a cartoon of it called Drawing the Line in Mississippi. And so that's where Teddy Bear gets his name from. He is here in the background being a baby, because he's a baby at night. Catty and Teddy they get along surprisingly well. That's Catty with a lion's cut and Teddy dressed as a lamb. When Teddy gets dressed up, he gets so upset, he just collapses, gives up on life. It's so cute. Besides having two pets, on my free time, I am a bagpiper with the North Texas Caledonian Pipes and Drums. We have 2 CDs. You can see the website at ntcpd.com. That is a plug. And we are a nationally competitive bagpipe band. We were going to be internationally competitive for the first time last year, but COVID. They also canceled the World Pipe Band Championship this year. So hopefully 2022 we will get to compete in the world stage. If you like bagpipes, or you have any interest in bagpipes, feel free to send me an email or ask about them. I am happy to talk about them. Besides having 2 wonderful pets and playing bagpipes, I absolutely love history. This is not just a profession for me, it's a passion. So how did I get so into history? It was actually a very simple and obvious transition. I used to read a lot of comic books. Just Marvel, though, not DC. I used to love comic books until I realized at some point that comic books are actually just soap operas with superpowers and some fighting. It was when Spider-Man's parents came back for like the 3rd time that I realized, this gets a little bit old. Especially when I found out that there were human beings that accomplished things that were so amazing, they might as well be superheroes themselves. We will talk a lot more about George Washington this semester. He is the indispensable man because without George Washington, we do not get an America. Thomas Jefferson, he could read and write 6 languages. Supposedly he could write in Latin with one hand and Greek with the other at the same time. And he didn't even have Rosetta Stone. Everything that these people accomplished, they did in the same world that you and I live in, with gravity and all the same problems, but we have more opportunity. We have Rosetta Stone. We should be able to speak several languages. I'm not a big Paul Revere fan. He's overrated, but that's just a great picture. The British are coming. He didn't actually say that. He said the Redcoats are coming because Americans considered themselves British at that time. But look at his patriotism points. Benjamin Franklin, one of my favorite of the founding fathers. There's him with Wolverine claws, stealing Zeus's thunder. He's one of the two main founding fathers, born poor, relatively poor. The poorest, Alexander Hamilton, who we'll talk a lot more about. Andrew Jackson, alien hunter. We will talk extensively about him, and you will have to write a paper about the Jacksonian era. And the greatest president of all time, Abraham Lincoln. You can see on his gun, he says the Emancipator. He was chronically depressed. There was 2 periods in his life where he was so depressed that his friends took away his razors and all sharp objects because they were sure he was going to kill himself. He was a lawyer at the time, and for a few months, he spent about 2 or 3 hours a day lying on his back and staring at the ceiling, just waiting for the depression to go away. He was born insanely poor. His family lived in a 3-walled cabin at one point. And this man, who has Marfan's disease also, which meant he was probably going to die young, John Wilkes Booth hadn't seen to it that he definitely did. Marfan's disease, born dirt poor, chronically depressed, and he becomes arguably the greatest American of all time, at least in the top 3. That is superhuman. That is how I got into history. So, that's why I'm here. Why are you here? I will answer that for you. It's because this is a required course. If you want to graduate from college, which you do, you have to take U.S. history. So then the next question is, why is history mandatory? Well, just for the sake of graduating college. That is so incredibly important now. We live in what's called a knowledge-based economy. That means now what will determine how successful you are in life is largely based on what you have between your ears, what you've put between your ears, the knowledge you've learned. The big 4 fields that are growing the fastest are finance, computers, healthcare, and education. And all 4 of those things require you to not only get college degrees, most of them require advanced degrees, and you will have to continuously go back to school. Learning in a knowledge-based economy never ends. But we have never had bigger economic discrepancy between people with college degrees and people without college degrees in all of U.S. history. So getting a college degree is more important now than it has ever been. And this class will help you in that process. Not just because it's a required class, but because it is specifically tailored to help prepare you for when you transfer to a 4-year university, like many of you are planning on doing. I started at NCTC, the Corinth campus. I homeschooled, so I didn't have a GPA. So I started at NCTC, so did my older sister. We both got 4.0s at NCTC in our first year, and then we both transferred out of Texas to colleges in New York. And we both got great scholarships. And you can do that too. You can get a 4.0 at NCTC, and I will help you do that. So make sure you pay attention in this class, and this class will help you in the future. So that is a very practical reason you're in this class. But why history? Why is history mandatory? Why do we study history? The answer you'll hear most often is so we can learn from our mistakes. And I promise you, we never learn from history. Mark Twain, it is not worthwhile to try to keep history from repeating itself, for man's character will always make the preventing of the repetitions impossible. He is so incredibly right. My dissertation and the book I'm writing is about the Great Depression. Economic collapses always follow the same pattern, and they will continue to happen because history shows there's ways to prevent it, but you have to tell people to not pursue money as aggressively. And that just does not work very well in the United States. So the learning from our past, it sounds good, but we don't do that. So what's another reason then? Logic. Logic is the formulaic reasoning of cause and effect. A plus B equals C. Historians tend to be good at this because we have to take events from the past to reach some sort of a conclusion. The people that are best at logic, math majors and philosophy majors, because philosophy is, you have to take logic classes. But history is like 6th or 7th, I think. Historians are fairly good at logic because we have to make logical arguments, and you are going to have to make logical arguments in the papers you write. I'm just going to give you one very quick example of logic and also how history is affecting us to this day. In the United States, African Americans suffer from heart disease at a rate somewhere between 30 and 50% higher than every other group. Why? Some people looked into this, some Harvard economists and historians, and they found out that that same statistic is true in North America, is true in South America, and is true in the Caribbean of people who are descended from slaves. It is not true of any other group, any other race or ethnicity in the United States, and it's not true of Africans. African Americans have a much higher rate of heart disease, hypertension and heart disease than people in Africa. Why? There's something called the slavery hypertension hypothesis. And a lot of it was based on what a historian found out, starting with this picture. This picture is from 1745. It's called Englishmen Testing for Health. If you look closely, that Englishman, he's a slave trader. He's licking the slave in Africa. Why would he be licking a potential slave? It's because slaves were incredibly expensive, and a lot of them died on the passage across the Atlantic. So, the people that were bringing them across the Atlantic, that is a lot of money they were investing. So they would sometimes lick this potential slaves to see how much they were sweating out, to see how much they were metabolizing sodium or salt. Sodium metabolism, that regulates your blood pressure. Now, if a potential slave retained the sodium, if they had sodium retention, it means they're also going to retain water. So, that means they're more likely to survive on the passage across the Atlantic. So they would look them to see if they're sweating out too much salt, that means they weren't retaining sodium, which means they'd probably die, so they wouldn't be taken. So the slave traders specifically licked the slaves, potential slaves, and picked the ones that retained sodium so they could survive the passage across the Atlantic. But long-term sodium retention, it leads to hypertension, which leads to heart disease. So, slave owners making the decision to pick individuals who retain sodium, specifically picked a population that was going to have offspring that were going to retain sodium. And that is one major argument for the reason that there is so much higher of a rate of heart disease among African Americans than among any other group in all of America, and also of Africans in Africa. That is what we will be talking a lot about is these cause and effects, these long-term cause and effects. And you will get to see how logical arguments are made. And in the discussion assignments, you will have to make arguments, logical arguments yourself. So you will get to practice this. And you'll get to see how history is affecting us today, because history is affecting us today. And that brings us to our final reason that you're in this class. You are living in the most powerful country the world has ever seen. That affects you. It affects the way you think. It affects the way you act. And it is so important for you to understand the history of the United States so you can understand why we are where we are today. And it will help you understand yourself better. Do not have to know any of the statistics I'm about to say, but the United States has about 332 million people, which is somewhere, it's like 4.2% of the world's population. So we'll just say 4% of the world's population. But it controls almost 25% of the world's economy. 25% of the world GDP is in the United States. So it is the most economically powerful country the world's ever seen. And the United States, it also currently spends more than the next 11 countries combined in military spending. And 7 of those 11 countries are U.S. allies. So 4% of the world's population is spending somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of all military expenditures in the entire world. So it is the most militarily and economically powerful country the world has ever seen. It is exceptional. But remember, exceptional means unusual or atypical. It doesn't mean better, because there are a lot of statistics that will show the United States is exceptional in some very good ways. It spends, Americans are the most philanthropic people on the planet, spend more for human rights than any other country. But it also has some unfortunate statistics. For example, in the United States, there are more guns in privately held hands than anywhere else in the world. And this isn't a good thing or a bad thing. It is just a fact. Of per 100 Americans, the United States has somewhere around 120 guns. The country with the second highest amount of guns in private ownership is Yemen. And Yemen has something like 52 guns per 100 people. So the United States has more than 100 guns, or more than twice as many guns as Yemen does, which is this country with the second most guns. And we have more guns in private hands than we do individuals. So great. The United States is safer then, right? No. There is more gun deaths, more homicides in the United States than any other industrialized country in the world. If you compare it to third world countries, then the United States is not close. But the third world countries includes places that have tribal governments, and the United States should not be compared to anyway. The U.S. has way more gun violence than any other nation, an industrialized nation. Well, good, so there are criminals being shot. No. Most people that are shot by guns own the guns. So the last year we have full statistics for was 2019. In 2019, there was something like 36,000 gun deaths. Of those 36,000, somewhere around 19,000 of those were suicides. So of the 7.8 billion people on the planet, the person that is most likely to shoot you if you own a gun is yourself. Second most likely person to be shot if you own a gun, significant other. And if you watch Dateline or any true crime documentary, you know it's just always the husband. So the two people most likely to be shot if you own a gun is yourself and your significant other. The U.S. also has way more mass shootings than any other country in the world. Since 2015, it's been somewhere in the neighborhood of one mass shooting every 47 days, depending on how you define mass shootings. Again, I'm not saying this is good or bad, it is just a fact of the United States. The United States also has more people incarcerated in prisons than anywhere else in the world. 4% of the world's population has roughly 22% of all prisoners in the entire world. And what's really astronomical is the U.S. spends somewhere in the neighborhood of $31,000 per inmate per year. In comparison, the United States spends about $11,000 per student in the United States per year. So we spend about $20,000 more per inmate in this country, and we have a ton of inmates. That's probably one of the reasons also in terms of math, science, and reading skills. The United States, which has the best education system in the entire world, ranks 25th because we spend a lot more on prisons than we do on education. And what we spend the absolute most on, even more than military spending, healthcare costs. The United States outspends every other country by far in terms of healthcare costs. Great, so we're a healthy nation. No, not by far. In terms of healthiness of citizens, the United States ranks 35th. That's longevity and quality of care. 35th in the entire world. The United States is the only industrialized nation that you can go bankrupt for life-saving medical expenses. So if you want to survive something like cancer, you can go bankrupt. No other industrialized country will let their citizens go bankrupt to save their own life. The United States is also the only industrialized nation that has no federal maternity leave. And more recently, the United States is doing incredibly bad with COVID. Across the entire world, there's something like 4.4 million COVID deaths, and as of August 2021, the United States has 644,000, or about 14.5%. 4% of the world's population somehow, with the best healthcare system, emergency healthcare system in the world, has 14.5% of all deaths from COVID. The United States is exceptional. It's exceptional in a lot of good ways, some ways not so good, but it is exceptional. And it changes the way people who live here think and the way they act. If I asked you, does someone from a poor family think differently than someone from a rich family? The answer is very obviously yes. Someone from the richest country the world has ever seen think differently than someone from a third world country? Absolutely. That's why it is so fundamentally important to understand the history of the United States. Because you cannot understand the present without understanding the past. And you cannot understand yourself without understanding your own history. The history of the United States is part of your history. And once you understand the history of the United States, I promise you will understand yourself better. Welcome to History 1301. So excited to have you in this class.